15 interpreters. 15. Every single one of them walked into that room with a resume, a certification, and a confidence that lasted exactly until the moment they put on the headset. And one by one, 15 times, the room watched them fail. Millions of dollars bleeding out by the minute. 8 foreign delegates losing patience in 8 different languages. And the most powerful CEO in the building standing at the head of the table watching her empire crack in real time. What nobody in that room knew, what nobody even thought to consider, was that the man who had been cleaning their floors for 6 years was standing just outside that glass wall, listening, understanding every single word, in all 8 languages, and deciding whether a man like him was allowed to walk through that door. Before we go any further, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been the smartest person in a room that refused to see you, this one is for you. Like this video, subscribe. Drop the word unseen in the comments right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Let's see how many of us have been that person standing outside the glass wall, waiting for our moment. And let's see just how far this story travels. Nobody said good morning to Rudy Kellum. Not the receptionist who saw him every single day. Not the junior analysts who brushed past him in the elevator, eyes buried in their phones. Not the executives who walked through doors he had just polished without so much as a glance. That was just how it was. Rudy clocked in at 5:45 every morning, pulled on his Navy uniform and got to work. Floors, restrooms, break rooms that smelled like burnt coffee and entitlement. He moved through the building like a ghost, present everywhere, noticed nowhere. He was used to it. Didn't mean it didn't sting. What most people in that building didn't know, what they never bothered to find out, was that the man pushing the mop down the 40th floor corridor had once tested into the top percentile of a national linguistics program. That he read Dostoevsky in Russian on his lunch break. That he could hear 2 strangers arguing in Mandarin on the street and tell you not just what they were saying, but what they actually meant. None of that showed up in the way people looked at him, or didn't look at him. His supervisor, Carl, handed him a revised cleaning schedule that morning without making eye contact. A junior executive named Brett bumped into him near the supply closet and muttered, "Watch it," like Rudy had appeared out of thin air just to inconvenience him. Rudy said nothing, just nodded and kept moving. He had learned a long time ago that some rooms were not built for men like him. Not yet, anyway. He grabbed his cart, turned down the corridor toward the executive floor, and got to work. Rudy grew up in a neighborhood that the rest of the city pretended didn't exist. But to him, it was everything. 3 blocks in any direction and you were in a completely different world. The Nguyen's ran the corner store where Rudy stocked shelves after school. Mr. Nguyen used to correct his Vietnamese pronunciations with a straight face and a hidden smile. The Okonkwo's next door filled their apartment with Igbo music every Sunday morning. Old Mr. Petrov downstairs had fought in a war he never named and taught Rudy chess and Russian in the same breath. Rudy absorbed all of it. Not because he was trying to, because he genuinely loved it, the way a language carried an entire people inside it. The way the same emotion could feel completely different depending on which tongue you used to express it. By 16, he was dreaming in Spanish. By 19, he was writing letters in Arabic for the elderly Yemeni man who lived above the laundromat. He got a linguistic scholarship at 20. Full ride. His mother cried at the kitchen table when the letter came. He deferred it when she got sick. Deferred it again when the bills came. Deferred it until deferring became forgetting, and forgetting became just life. He never stopped studying though. Library books. Online lectures at midnight. Conversations with anyone willing to have them. Languages never asked where you were from. They didn't care what you wore or what floor you worked on. They just opened if you were patient enough, humble enough, hungry enough to listen. Rudy had always been all 3. He just hadn't found the room yet where that mattered. Stacy Younce had built her company with her bare hands and sheer will. Younce Global Partners was her name on the door, her vision on the wall, her reputation on the line every single day. She did not lose deals. She did not accept failure. And she absolutely did not panic. But standing at the head of that conference table on the 40th floor, watching her 12th interpreter pack up his notes in quiet defeat, something very close to panic was scratching at the back of her throat. The meeting had been 2 years in the making. 8 international stakeholder groups: Japan, Germany, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, France, South Korea, Nigeria, China. All at the table for a merger that would make Yount Global a genuinely global force. The contracts were ready. The numbers worked. Everything was in place. Except the words. Every interpreter she had brought in ran into the same wall. It wasn't just vocabulary. The German delegation needed absolute legal precision. The Japanese contingent communicated in layers of implication that kept getting flattened into bluntness. The Nigerian representatives spoke in frameworks that her translators kept rendering literally, missing the meaning entirely. The Brazilians were reading body language that nobody in the room knew how to answer. Misunderstanding stacked on misunderstanding. The Saudi delegate had stopped speaking altogether. The South Korean team was whispering among themselves with expressions that did not suggest optimism. Stacy called for a 15-minute recess, stepped to the window, and stared out at the Chicago skyline. She had one move left. One more interpreter waiting in the hallway. She already knew, somehow it wasn't going to be enough. Rudy wasn't supposed to be on that floor. His schedule had him 2 floors down. But the executive bathroom on 38 had flooded that morning and pushed everything back. So there he was, cart squeaking softly down the corridor outside the main conference room, when the voices started bleeding through the glass. He wasn't trying to listen. But some things you can't unhear. The 13th interpreter was attempting to clarify a critical revenue-sharing clause to the Japanese delegation. Rudy slowed the cart without thinking. The interpreter's Japanese was technically correct. Clean grammar, proper sentence structure. But the framing was completely wrong. In the context being used, the phrasing implied that the Japanese partners were being asked to accept a subordinate position in the agreement. A deeply disrespectful read of what was actually a mutual arrangement. The lead Japanese delegate's face said everything. Polite on the surface. Closed underneath. Then the interpreter turned to the Nigerian contingent and translated a financial projection in a way that stripped out every layer of relational context the original speaker had embedded in it. What was meant as an invitation to collaborate landed as a demand. Rudy stood very still. He watched the 14th interpreter step in. Then the 15th. Each one brought the same problem through the door with them, technical skill without cultural fluency. They were translating the language. Nobody was translating the people. The merger wasn't failing because of bad numbers. It was failing because nobody in that room actually understood what was being said. Rudy gripped the cart handle. His jaw tightened. He looked down at his uniform, looked back at the glass. He stood there for a long moment. Then he let go of the cart. The knock was quiet, just 2 knocks. But in that silence it sounded like a gavel. Every head in the room turned. Rudy stood in the doorway in his Navy uniform, one hand still raised from knocking, the other hanging at his side. He didn't step in yet. He just stood there, steady, meeting the room's stare without flinching. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Brett, the junior executive closest to the door, actually laughed. A short, sharp sound of disbelief. 2 of the other suits exchanged glances. One of the security contractors near the wall straightened up and took a step forward. Stacy Yount raised one hand without looking at him. The room stilled. She looked at Rudy. Not through him the way she had every other morning for 3 years. Actually at him, taking in his face, his posture, the fact that he did not look like a man who had knocked on the wrong door by accident. "This is a closed meeting," she said, measured, not unkind. "I know," Rudy said. "I've been listening from the hallway. You have a mistranslation problem, not an interpreter problem. I can fix it, if you'll give me the floor." The room went very quiet. Brett started to say something. Stacy silenced him with a look. She studied Rudy for a long moment. The deal was already dying. The alternative was watching it flatline completely in the next 20 minutes. 5 minutes, she said. Rudy nodded once, stepped inside, and let the door close behind him. He did not look at the floor. Rudy walked to the whiteboard like he belonged there, because in that moment he did. He picked up the marker, turned to the Japanese delegation first and spoke. Not translated English into Japanese. Spoke. In the register, the tone, the careful layered phrasing that Japanese business communication demanded. He reframed the revenue clause not as a concession but as a partnership of equals, using an expression that carried exactly the right cultural weight. The lead delegate's posture changed. Subtly, but anyone watching closely could see it. The guardedness softened. Rudy turned to the Nigerian representatives and addressed them in Yoruba, then switched mid-sentence into the specific English, framing their cultural context required to hear the proposal as the genuine collaboration it was intended to be. One of the delegates leaned forward for the first time all morning. He moved through the room methodically. Arabic to the Saudi contingent, formal, respectful, honoring the relational trust that had been inadvertently bruised by earlier exchanges. German to the Berlin team, precise, structured, legally airtight, no room for ambiguity. Portuguese to the Brazilian partners, warm and direct, matching the energy they had been trying to bring to the table for 2 hours. French, Korean, Mandarin, English tying it all together. The suited executives stood along the walls and said nothing. There was nothing to say. Stacy Younce watched from the head of the table. She had spent 20 years learning how to read a room. She knew what she was watching. This wasn't translation. This was mastery. The whiteboard filled up. The delegates began nodding, then talking, then, for the first time all day, actually listening to each other. Nobody called recess. Nobody needed to. The thing that had been broken for 2 days quietly, almost imperceptibly, fixed itself over the next 40 minutes. The Saudi delegate who had gone silent started speaking again. Measured, cautious at first, then with growing confidence as Rudy continued to bridge each exchange with precision and care. The South Korean team, who had been whispering among themselves since morning, put their notes down and engaged directly. Even Brett stopped looking at his phone. By the time the final terms were verbally agreed upon, the atmosphere in the room was almost unrecognizable from what it had been an hour earlier. Delegates who had arrived that morning tight-shouldered and skeptical were exchanging cards, sharing small laughs, asking questions out of genuine curiosity rather than legal defensiveness. The Japanese lead said something quietly to Rudy as the formal session wrapped. Rudy responded in kind, and the man gave a slow, respectful nod, the kind that isn't a formality. The Nigerian delegation's senior partner shook Rudy's hand last, held it for a moment, said, in English, "You understand us." Simple words. The weight behind them was not simple at all. Stacy stood at the front of the room and watched her company's most important deal find its footing again because of a man in a maintenance uniform. The executives around her were already recalibrating. You could see it in their faces. The quiet reconsideration of everything they thought they knew about who belonged in a room like this. Stacy didn't need to recalibrate. She just needed to act. She caught Rudy's eye across the table and said simply, "Don't go anywhere." Her office was on the top floor. Rudy had cleaned it hundreds of times. He had never sat in it. Stacy closed the door, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and sat down. No performance, no corporate warmth. Just 2 people in a room, the city spread out behind the glass behind her. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. 6 years, Rudy said. She nodded slowly. And in 6 years, nobody knew. It wasn't a question. It landed somewhere between an observation and an admission. "Nobody asked," Rudy said. "No bitterness in it. Just the truth, clean and plain." She asked about the languages. He told her, not the polished version, the real one. The corner store in his neighborhood. The old Russian man downstairs. The midnight library sessions. The scholarship he never used. She listened without interrupting, which he hadn't expected. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not just today. For 6 years of walking past you." Rudy looked at her. "I'm not looking for an apology." "I know," she said. "I'm giving you one anyway." She slid a folder across the desk. "And this." He opened it. Director of Global Communications. Salary that made him read the number twice. Benefits. An office 2 floors below hers. "This isn't charity," she said before he could speak. "I run a business. Today you saved it. I need you at the table, not in the hallway." Rudy closed the folder, looked out at the skyline. He thought about every morning he had badged into that building and felt like a ghost. "Okay," he said. 3 years later, Rudy walked into the same conference room through the front door. Same room, same glass walls, same view of the Chicago skyline pressing up against the windows. But everything else was different. His name was on the agenda. His chair was at the table. When the delegates filed in, new faces from new countries, a fresh round of negotiations, they greeted him first. Not out of courtesy, because they knew who he was. His reputation had moved ahead of him in ways he was still getting used to. He still got to the building early. Old habit. But now when he came through the lobby, the receptionist called him by name. The analysts held the elevator. Small things. The kind of small things that don't seem like much until you've spent years without them. He kept a photo on his desk, him and his mother, taken outside the library where he used to study after his shifts. She hadn't lived to see this floor, but she had lived long enough to see him refuse to disappear, and that, he had decided, was enough. Sometimes a new employee would pass him in the hall and not know who he was. Would see a tall, quiet man in a well-fitted jacket and assume he belonged there because of how he carried himself. He did belong there. He always had. The room filled up. Stacy took her seat at the head of the table and gave him a nod across the room. The small, certain nod of someone who knows exactly what they almost lost. Rudy opened his notebook, uncapped his pen, and got to work. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be seen. Rudy Kellum had simply waited for the right room. Before you close out of this video, sit with this for just a moment. Rudy Kellum did not become brilliant the day he walked into that boardroom. He was brilliant every single morning he badged into that building and nobody said good morning. He was brilliant every night he studied languages in silence with no applause, no audience, and no guarantee that any of it would ever matter. He was brilliant every single time someone looked straight through him and saw nothing worth stopping for. The world did not create his genius. It just delayed the room where it would finally be heard. And that is the real lesson here. We have built systems in our workplaces, in our communities, in our everyday lives that are incredibly efficient at recognizing talent that looks a certain way, dresses a certain way, and arrives through a certain door. And those same systems are equally efficient at walking right past everything else. The most expensive mistake you can make in business, and in life, is confusing someone's circumstances with their ceiling. Rudy's uniform was never who he was. It was just what the world handed him while it wasn't paying attention. So here is the question this story is really asking you. Not who is Rudy Kellum, but who is the Rudy Kellum in your life right now, in your office, in your neighborhood, in your family, that you have been walking past without looking up. Because they are there. They have always been there. Waiting, studying, growing, ready. All they need is someone brave enough to give them 60 seconds.